There are ideas that do not disappear when history tries to erase them. They retreat, they condense, they hide inside the human mind itself. What you are about to explore is not a forgotten ritual, not a lost belief, but a way of thinking that survived by becoming invisible. For centuries, this knowledge avoided books, avoided institutions, avoided names. Because it understood something most systems never do. That the truth becomes fixed, becomes fragile. This path was never meant to be followed by crowds. It was meant to be recognized by individuals, not learned through instruction, but discovered through awareness. Here, silence is not absence. It is a tool. Symbols are not decoration. They are compressed meaning. And intuition is not imagination. It is memory resurfacing. As we move forward, understand this clearly. We are not uncovering history. We are uncovering the mechanism behind it. And once you see that mechanism, it becomes impossible to unsee. And once you see that mechanism, it becomes impossible to unsee. Welcome to Historic Isles. To move further into this hidden tradition is to accept a difficult truth. Some forms of knowledge were never designed to survive through explanation. They survive through transformation. The old craft understood this instinctively. It did not rely on monuments, texts, or institutions to preserve itself. Those things attract attention, and attention attracts destruction. Instead, it chose a far more resilient refuge, the human mind. Not the conscious mind that argues, categorizes, and demands proof, but the deeper mind, the one that remembers patterns, reacts before logic, intervenes, and senses meaning without needing permission. This is where the craft lived. While history recorded wars, empires, and doctrines, this knowledge learned to flow beneath those records, moving quietly from generation to generation, encoded not in words, but in behavior. A pause before speaking, a hesitation before entering certain places, an unexplainable pull towards symbols, cycles, and silence. These were not coincidences, they were traces. The practitioners understood something fundamental about survival, that anything which can be named, defined, and centralized can also be targeted. So they avoided clarity. They avoided structure. They avoided permanence. What they built instead was fluid, capable of reshaping itself, depending on who encountered it. At the core of this tradition was a radical idea that reality is not something we merely observe. It is something we participate in. Every thought, every intention, every suppressed fear subtly alters how the world is experienced. The craft was not interested in controlling the external world. It focused on refining the internal lens through which the world is perceived. Because change the lens, and the entire landscape transforms. This is why ritual was never about performance. It was about alignment, aligned attention, aligned emotion, aligned intention. When these elements moved in the same direction, clarity emerged. The modern world often dismisses this as primitive, but that dismissal reveals more about modern arrogance than ancient ignorance. The practitioners had no formal psychology, yet they understood trauma, projection, repression, and cognitive distortion with unsettling precision. They knew that fear left unattended becomes belief. That belief hardens into identity. And identity, once fixed, becomes a prison. So they designed practices that kept identity flexible. Silence played a central role in this system, not as absence, but as exposure. In silence, distractions collapse, patterns surface, the mind begins to confront itself. Modern systems avoid silence because silence reveals instability. The craft embraced silence for exactly that reason. It taught practitioners to sit with discomfort, to observe anxiety without naming it, to allow fear to exhaust itself instead of suppressing it. This was not spiritual theatrics. It was internal training, and because this training could not be measured, standardized, or commercialized, it terrified. Structured power. As institutions grew, the craft retreated further, not out of defeat, but out of understanding. They recognized that survival did not require visibility. It required continuity. So the knowledge began to compress. Long rites were reduced to gestures. Complex teachings became proverbs. Entire systems of meaning were folded into symbols small enough to hide in plain sight. A knot tied a certain way. A mark scratched into wood. A habit repeated without explanation. Each one functioned like a data fragment, harmless on its own, but devastatingly powerful when assembled by the right mind. This is why the craft appears fragmented to historians. They see broken pieces and assume collapse, but fragmentation was intentional. A complete system invites destruction. A fragmented one invites curiosity. Only those who sensed coherence beneath the fragments were drawn deeper. Others walked past, unaware. This selective invisibility became the craft's greatest defense. Another principle guided this tradition, one that modern culture still struggles to accept. Meaning cannot be inherited. It must be encountered. No practitioner was handed truth. They were pushed toward thresholds, moments of uncertainty, fear, loss, and transformation. Thresholds strip away illusion. They reveal what remains when certainty dissolves. The craft paid close attention to such moments. Birth, death, illness, isolation, transition. Not because these moments were mystical, but because they exposed the mind in its rawest state. In those states, symbols imprint deeply, patterns embed themselves without resistance, and understanding occurs without explanation. This is how knowledge bypassed language. As centuries passed, something unexpected happened. The world grew louder, faster, more efficient, and less internally stable. People lost contact with silence, with cycles, with instinct. But the human mind did not forget its older architecture. It only buried it, and buried things have a way of resurfacing. In modern times, fragments of the craft began appearing under new names. Intuition, shadow work, subconscious processing, symbolic therapy, embodied awareness. Different disciplines approaching the same realization from different angles that the mind is not a machine. It is an ecosystem, and ecosystems cannot be controlled. They can only be navigated. The old craft was navigation. It offered no certainty, no guarantees. No dogma, only tools. Tools to recognize internal shifts. Tools to confront fear without surrendering to it. Tools to perceive patterns before they solidify into suffering. This is why the craft did not promise salvation. It promised responsibility. Responsibility for perception, for reaction, for intention. A dangerous promise, because it removes the comfort of blame. Perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of this tradition was its relationship with darkness. Darkness was not evil. It was unexamined territory. The craft did not encourage obsession with darkness. It encouraged familiarity with it. What you do not examine controls you. What you refuse to see directs you from behind. By facing inner darkness, fear, anger, desire, grief, the practitioner reduced its power. Modern systems often pathologize these elements or suppress them entirely. The craft integrated them, not to glorify them, but to neutralize them. This integration created individuals who were psychologically resilient, less reactive, harder to manipulate. And that, more than any ritual, was what made the craft threatening. Because systems of control rely on predictable fear. As we approach the deeper layers of this journey, it becomes clear that the craft was never trying to preserve the past. It was preparing for cycles of forgetting. It anticipated futures where information would increase, but understanding would shrink, where speed would replace reflection, where certainty would be valued over clarity. In such worlds, the craft becomes relevant again, not as belief, but as counterbalance. It does not ask to be believed. It asks to be noticed. And that is why it continues to survive, not in temples, not in books, but in moments. Moments when intuition interrupts logic, when silence feels heavier than noise, when symbols feel charged without explanation, when something inside recognizes meaning before the mind catches up. These moments are not accidents. They are entry points. The journey we are on is not toward revelation. It is toward recognition. Recognition that some knowledge does not belong to history. It belongs to the structure of the human mind itself. And once activated, it cannot be unlearned. It does not announce itself. It does not demand loyalty. It simply waits until the mind is quiet enough to hear it.